I'm Jorge Andrés Vega here in Holyoke Media in our studios at 1 Court Plaza in Holyoke, Massachusetts. I want to welcome Jorge Andrés Ballesteros, who is the composer of Corazón, one of the pieces that will be premiering in this series of pieces of Si Se Puede, Yes We Can, part of Victory Players residency in this year 2023. Welcome.
Thank you.
So your piece, Corazón, is the name of a very important deity in the pre-Hispanic Mexican culture, particularly in the Aztec culture. How this name and the inspiration for that comes into play for creating your piece for Si Se Puede?
Yeah, so Coyolxauhqui, like you said, is this very important Aztec goddess. She comes into play in two big ways, in two very different ways. In the first section of the piece, it retells the myth of Coyolxauhqui, how she and her brothers fought against their mother and their other brother, Huitzilopochtli. The way this is framed in Aztec mythology is usually, this is a story about the birth of Huitzilopochtli, who was the sun god, kind of the ultimate deity. But this is focusing more on Coyolxauhqui, who in that original was the antagonist. She loses the battle, gets torn to shreds, her head is thrown up into the sky to become the moon. And there's this incredible carving on this giant stone that they found at the ruins of Tenochtitlan. You can still see it if you go down to Mexico City. It's massive, and she's torn to pieces. And that leads to the second point of connection, which is the Chicana writer Gloria Anzaldúa. She connected back to this myth and wrote about this Coyolxauhqui imperative. And this idea that as you go through the course of life, you are going to eventually experience an event that will tear you apart. You will be in pieces. And she connects it to the Mexican-American experience. She has an essay where she connects it to 9/11 and the collective trauma that we went through. And she writes that once you reach that point, you've fallen apart. It's going to happen. You can either choose the path of desconocimiento, pretend nothing happened, ignore the trauma, ignore the wounds, and try to carry on. And that's not going to lead you anywhere good. Or you can choose the path of conocimiento, to look at this wound in the face, la sombra de la herida, the shadow of the wound, and really try to stitch yourself back together into a coherent whole, even though you know you're going to fall apart again sometime in the future. The process will never end, but you try anyways.
Seeing the inspiration that comes from this piece, but also seeing your work as an activist, particularly working along with youth, empowering them and giving them ways for them to learn and get awareness and advocating for what is right for them. How does this work of activism connect with your work as a composer for this piece that has that dichotomy of representation of Aztec culture, but also this duality that is happening in the Mexican-American experience?
Yeah, I think part of it is just representation, and kind of the first step in education or in learning is knowing that something is there. So for those who hadn't heard the myth of Coyolxauhqui, this is an opportunity to hear it. One of the other composers here, she keeps telling me that it's like Aztec Peter and the Wolf, where there's a story, there's a narrative with music in the background, and they go together. So for example, there's one of the short sections is it's going through the Aztec calendar, which has different symbols. And one of those symbols is death. So you hear the string players are doing this like kind of death-like sound. And another one is earthquake, so they're all shaking a little bit. So the narrative goes with the music, and that's one part of it. Get to know this myth that you may not have known. Another part is, I hope more people hear about Gloria Anzaldúa and her writings, because they're amazing. Like all of her essays are just really moving and like really speak to the Mexican American experience in a way I don't think I've experienced elsewhere. And maybe it connects to the activism and just getting people to think about the connections between these different identities, these different ways of being. This idea of our community is in many different parts. We need all these parts to make a whole.
Did you mention death, earthquake, and then this being represented through the music sheet, the notation, and victory players being able to represent that on their performance? How were you able to utilize the instrumentation of victory players to generate these images and these experiences that connect with centuries and even millennia when we talk about pre-Hispanic cultures, to emulate the sound of even some instrumentation that are pre-Hispanic, like some particular sounds of flutes or percussions like the teponaztli, but through the sounds of victory players? How did that play there?
Yeah, so we were very lucky to have a series of workshops given by composer Jorge Sosa, incredible human being, and so knowledgeable about the full range of Mexican music. And part of those workshops focused on pre-colonial music. And the players learned about it. We listened to examples so that when I say, hey, the flute and drum players that I remember from people walking down the street in Mexico City, I'm glad you were able to hear that, because now you know the sound that we're trying to recreate in this 21st century modern flute. I can talk with the percussionist and say, hey, what drums do you have? How can we respectfully approximate a sound that makes sense here? Sometimes it's a little more removed. Goyoshauki means painted with bells. We're not using pre-Hispanic bells, but we do have bells that we can use, and sometimes it's even further removed. What does it sound like to go to battle? How can we depict that? Well, let's talk to the players and see what intense marching sound we can create.
So being able to work with victory players in this way, that you were close to them and have this back and forth, creates a very different experience where you are not only writing the piece, but also having this feedback and this possibility to expand or to go more in details about how the piece is going to sound. So how was for you to be able to come from the inspiration to your piece and now being able to premiere Goyoshauki performed by the victory players while you are part of the process almost in its entirety?
Well, it certainly helps that the victory players are unbelievable musicians, and they're very musically intelligent, not just in terms of playing their instrument, but in terms of thinking about music, which opens up the possibility of creating the piece through conversations. If this is the effect we want, can we try a few things? Can we see what works best for yourself? Can we see what works best when we put this in the full group? And really the opportunity to test ideas out, to see what works is really exciting. To be able to trust them with what's in a lot of cases really difficult music, and know that they will be able to take that, play it in a way that's their own. One section of the piece is chaotic. It takes the control actually away from the conductor and gives it to the players. And the piece moves forward based on the decisions that they make. They explore this map in whatever way they choose. And these are players that know how to think like this. So I can trust them with something that is unusual to navigate and know that they will be able to do that and create something hopefully magical out of it.
In the aspects of what personally means to you being able to create a piece that represents your identity, your culture, your background, and also being able to show that in a place like Holyoke, where while the Mexican representation is not as big as for instance, the Puerto Rican people who is residing in this city, in this region mostly, but still there is a connection because we share language, and also we share some of the experiences of being rich cultures before the arrival of the Europeans, and that transition into what we are today. Mm-hmm. How all of that plays in your personal experience, history, and narrative to come up with the idea of creating Corazón?
Yeah, we talk about the melting pot sometimes in terms of the whole country, but each of us is our own little melting pot too. I've seen the Corazón stone since I was a kid, but I don't think I knew the legend until later. So that's connecting very strongly to these Mexican roots, these like very Mexican roots. But I've lived the vast majority of my life in the U.S. Like I was born in the U.S. Even though I lived in Mexico for a while. This is where I was born, and there is an inherent tension in being Mexican American and in all these hyphenated identities, right? Where do you live? Or as people ask, where are you from? No, where are you really from? And the answer is that there is no answer, or that there's many answers. So this piece touches on that. It's got this Aztec myth. It's got this transition period where it's trying to figure out what it is. It's got texts that connect to Gloria Anzaldúa, who is Chicana, Mexican-American writer herself. It's all of these things, and it's none of these things, like me.
Well, we are very pleased to have you here and looking forward to enjoy of Corazón. I think is going to be another really enlightening aspect of discovering the Mexican-American experience through your sound, through your music, through your story. And we are very pleased to have you here in this residency with the Victory Players.
I'm excited to be here.